Hello everybody, we're talking about securing macOS MDM enrollments. I'm Kory Prince, a staff engineer at Airbnb.
And I'm Victor Souza. I'm a senior engineer at Airbnb on the same team. And before we start, we just have to say that the views expressed in this talk are our own and do not necessarily reflect those of our employer. So, today we're talking about MDM enrollment security. What is that? In short, it's security controls to prevent unauthorized enrollment into your MDM. What we'll cover is the zero trust principles that we can apply to that during the enrollment process. What we won't cover is any security you can apply after enrollment. Again, so why is MDM enrollment security important? Well, the enrollment is the first foothold into our company's devices. So we want to make sure that we have controls before it even enrolls. And enrollment security can prevent access to sensitive configurations and applications in our company. And as mentioned, we'll use a zero trust model to securing our MDM enrollment. At enrollment, we can focus on verifying user identity, making sure who the user is enrolling. We'll also verify the device identity and apply contextual information to do any further checks before accepting the enrollment. And a quick disclaimer, most of the information we're showing today is assuming a minimum of macOS version 14. Some features require slightly newer versions. We'll call that out. And so let's get started with user identity. With the enrollment flow, automated device enrollment serves as our entry point for identity verification. With ADE, we can prevent enrollment until we verify that the user is trusted. And we can do that in one of two authentication methods. So the first we have is with basic authentication. This is what it looks like. The Mac will request for DEP enrollment. We have our enrollment URL backed behind basic HTTP auth. What that does is then our MDM requests for a user to sign in. The user signs in, and we give back the enrollment profile. This is what the user sees. It's a little bit of a security, but not very customizable. Our second authentication approach is with the web view. By providing back a configuration web URL key in our DEP profile, we can have the setup assistant flow pull up a web view, and we can do whatever we want in that web view. So what can we do in there? Well, we can integrate it with our SSO, a custom sign-in. We can require the use of physical security keys to prevent unauthorized account access. Keys are unphishable, offers that extra layer of trust. And this is the support for security keys is on macOS 15.4 and newer. And like we said earlier, it's Safari, so we can go wherever Safari can go. So we can kind of customize this to our needs. For this demonstration, we will show what that web view looks like. We'll refer to our web view as the enroll handler. And just as a call out for WWDC this year, Platform SSO at enrollment was announced. We can now have the user authenticate with IDP credentials in our company's SSO login pages and do that enrollment and create the local user account. There is a great video with lots of information there.
Next, we're going to talk about device identity. So, how can we identify a device during enrollment? Apple gives us something they call machine info. It's attributes about the device sent during automated device enrollment. If you're doing the basic auth web flow, the first one that Victor showed, it'll come in the HTTP body. And if you're doing the web view, then it comes in a header that your server can parse. It's a plist with a bunch of attributes, and then it's signed by Apple PKI, so you can verify that it's trusted. Except it sort of isn't. You know, a lot of people are used to, in previous years, setting up VMs with serial numbers so that you can test dep. The fact that you can do that means that you can spoof it. Now, I believe Apple's made some changes to prevent spoofing, but it's not really well documented, so, you know, here be dragons. So what do we get in the machine info? There's some device identifiers, so you can get the serial number, the UDID, the product. And what can we do with those? You can check if that device is in your inventory. You can not allow certain types of devices. Maybe you don't want Vision OS devices enrolling in your MDM. You can stop that from happening. Or maybe you want to apply additional security controls. Maybe a certain set of your inventory is in a risky location, and so you turn up the dial to 11 on your security and your check's there. Next we have OS identifiers. So you get your normal, you know, public version. You also get the build. Sometimes Apple likes to release versions with multiple builds. You know, maybe we'll get another RSR one day. Hopefully not. And then there's this MDM can request software update field. If this field is true, then it means you can force the device to update to a version before continuing enrollment. This will only ever be true in Setup Assistant as of today. And then in 14.4, they also added the software update device ID. This device ID matches the GDMF API, which we'll talk about here in a second. So what can we do with these OS identifiers? We can require devices meet OS requirements before enrolling. In macOS 14, we can require devices to update to the latest macOS in Setup Assistant. Oftentimes that's not really what we want. Maybe we're pinning a particular version. In 14.6, they updated this mechanism so we can force the device to update to a version we specify. And how do we do that? We're going to take a quick look at the GDMF API. If you're not aware of the GDMF API, it's an API endpoint from Apple that has all of the software update information for the various OSs. So there's the public asset sets key, which is just like the latest version. It's the one we don't really care about. There's public rapid security responses, which is, you know, empty right now, and hopefully it stays that way. There's the asset sets, which lists all of the versions that are available to MDM enrolled devices. So an example of a macOS, we can see basically there's several keys that matches what is in the machine info. So we get the product version, the build, and then this last one is the particular device ID. So you can use this API to make sure you're sending a macOS version that is compatible with the version that's you're trying to force the version on. To actually force the version, it's pretty easy. You return, like when the device does the initial request for an enrollment profile, instead of returning an enrollment profile, you return an error 403 forbidden with JSON and just specify what OS version you want it to update to. And the device will be forced to update. It'll update, reboot, and then restart the enrollment flow. So once the device gets an enrollment profile, then it's got to enroll in the MDM. But first it needs a certificate. So I'm going to go quickly through the different ways a device can get an identity certificate. First is a certificate payload. You just dump the certificate and the private key in the enrollment profile. It works, and it's also got 3 red X's because it's bad, right? You've got the private key in the profile, and even if you get the profile on the device, that key is extractable, and there's no device identifiers attested there. Next is SCEP. Most of you are probably familiar with it. We've talked about it in this conference. It works. Most commercial MDMs are still using SCEP. The private key is at least generated on the device, but it's still extractable, and the device identifiers are not attested. Lastly, we have Acme, and particularly today we're going to be talking about an Acme payload with managed device attestation. So the private keys generated on the device. It's not exportable because it's in the secure enclave, and we can attest to identifiers with Apple PKI. So what is managed device attestation? It's basically a statement of multiple attributes, so your serial number, your UDID, that is signed by Apple PKI. Sounds a lot like the machine info, but this one is rooted in trust in the secure enclave, whereas the other one is a little more unknown, and Apple doesn't necessarily document how that one works, but they say this one is very secure. It's cryptographically linked to the secure enclave, and you can only use it with the Acme payload. So what is Acme? It's the automated certificate management, and then they added environment so it could spell Acme. It's a REST, HTTP, JSON API, similar to SCEP, except it's much more modern, uses modern cryptography. It's the thing behind Let's Encrypt, if you're familiar with that. It supports several challenges, including the device attest 01 challenge used by managed device attestation. Brandon, who's here in the crowd today, actually wrote that spec. All right, so what does it look like in practice? So a Mac wants an Acme MDA certificate. They send a request that they sign with the private key rooted in the secure enclave. Send that request to Apple. Apple does its checks of like, yeah, that secure enclave backed identifier is matched to the serial they want to attest to, so I'll sign that certificate with my PKI, Apple, send it back to the device. Mac then sends the attestation statement as part of its own request for a certificate to an Acme CA. The Acme CA can then verify the attestation is signed by Apple's PKI, and then decide if it wants to go further and sign the certificate. And if it does, then it returns the signed certificate to the device, which it can then use for its enrollment. One difference between SCEP and Acme is that SCEP has the idea of like a password, right, to secure the enrollment. There's lots of other issues with it, so that's why we don't want to keep using SCEP. But one thing you might want to do is prevent your enrollment profile from being shared, because the Acme profile doesn't have a password, right? So in theory, if this Acme profile, got installed on a device that's not one of your company devices, it will attest with Apple, right? It's a valid device. It can attest to its own serial number. That doesn't mean we want it in our MDM. So we want to prevent the Acme CA from signing certificates that aren't our devices. So we can do a couple things to prevent that. One is when the attestation comes through, we can say, is this serial or UDID or whatever, is it in our inventory? And if it's not, then deny the certificate. And then also as like a defense in depth thing, you can generate a one-time token and embed it in the enrollment profile, so you can't like replay that Acme profile later. So you generate a token, tie it to the UDID of the device, and when it enrolls it, the backend checks that, hey, this matches, and we allow it through. So what does this look like in practice? In our demo, we're using small step. So the Mac will request an enrollment profile. The enrollment handler, this is just the thing that's generating our enrollment profile in our demo. It fetches a one-time use secret from a small step webhook that we created. It embeds that one-time use secret in the enrollment profile, and then the Mac does the Acme request to step CA with the device attest 01. Step CA has support for webhooks, so it sends the attested identifiers like the serial along with the initial request, which includes our generated code, to our webhook. Our webhook says, okay, this serial is in our inventory and it matches the identifier that I generated for this particular device, so we're good. And then step CA says, okay, cool, we'll give you a certificate. It signs the certificate, returns it to the device, and the device enrolls in MDM because the MDM trusts the step CA CA. So back to Victor.
All right. The last part of our zero trust approach here to our MDM security controls is with context. Context allows us to apply any other forms of checks and decisions on if the Mac should continue enrolling. So some examples of context that we can apply is if a device is outside of its assigned office network, a user changes location faster than possible, that might be a bit fishy. A user is outside of their business working hours. These are all things that the web view ability kind of opens up that we can do and go make our own checks. And we've got not one but two live demos.
It works. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So in this first demo, it's going to go pretty quick. I am trying to enroll into a device that is running macOS 15.4.1, and as you can see, despite the bug in macOS 15, it's trying to update me to 15.5, which is what our security requirements are at the moment for enrolling a device. So I can't continue to enroll this device until I go through the enrollment flow, or sorry, through the update flow.
Yeah. So we're going to stop this so we don't take down the internet here. And with the power of bringing 3 MacBooks, we now have another demo. It works again.
This one is fully up to date. So we've done our OS checks. We're opening our web view here. It will take us to our MDM sign-in.
So we're announcing our new product today, Michael MDM.
There's our use of AI right there. So as a user, I'll log in. I will require a WebAuthn security key check. And we're in. And as you can see, all the stuff we do in the background, it's all pretty quick and seamless to the user.
All right. Live demos work.
I'm gonna switch over.
Yeah. All right, we're going to ignore that. 100% confidence. All right, so here's some logs from our demo to sort of show you all the things in action, right? So our enrollment handler, this is again the thing that opens that web view, and it's the server behind there serving the enrollment profile. So you can see we have all of our machine info coming from that header. Down here we have our Acme settings along with the dynamic Acme key here at the bottom. So the device gets the enrollment profile from this service. It then does the Acme flow with small step. Small step logs the certificate here. Obviously that's not like super helpful. So if you dump that out with OpenSSL, you can see in our certificate subject we have our attested identifiers, our serial number, model, UDID, and that dynamic code that was generated. And finally, you can see the device enrolls in Nano MDM, so we've got our authenticate message and bootstrap token, all of that. Thank you, Jesse, very much. All right.
Cool. And so just to put it all back together and do a quick recap, we can split this enrollment flow into kind of two sections. We've got the enrollment profile generation. That's when our Mac is going to request a DEP profile. It's going to get a DEP profile and the machine info from Apple. We'll send that over to our enroll handler. We'll make sure that it meets our OS policies. We'll make sure that it's in our inventory. We'll get our dynamic Acme secrets, and we'll return that enrollment profile. And then our second part will be verifying the device identity, which the Mac, again, will talk to Apple to get an attestation statement. We'll send that over to Step CA, request a certificate, verify that against Apple PKI. We'll verify that with our webhook, and then return our device identity certificate, which will finally allow the Mac to enroll into our MDM.
All right. So I'm sure a lot of you are asking, does my MDM support this? Right? It's really cool. All these features exist. The easy answer is if you use Nano MDM, then yes, it does. But I know most people in the room probably aren't in that situation. So what I would say is the point of our presentation here today is to show you what is possible, so that now you can go to your MDM vendor and say, look, we know we can do this. We want you to support it to help us do it. Lastly, if any of this interests you, come and join us at Airbnb. We have a couple of open positions. There's a security engineer and head of global IT support. Feel free to talk to Victor or I or Graham, or go to careers.airbnb.com. I posted the slides to this
Discord.
Yes.
On Discord.
Yes, I posted it in Discord. And also the repo. The demo that we ran today is all in GitHub if you want to run it yourself. All the example code and everything's there. So, thank you. Any questions? Anyone awake? One or two.
So let's say the Acme piece doesn't work because they're not using a real hardware. Do they get feedback? Is it bomb out somewhere? Like what happens?
Yeah, as far as like in the enrollment flow, it'll
Yeah.
basically say the enrollment failed. You'll
Okay.
get an obscure Apple error.
Okay.
Now, what you could do, if the machine or the serial isn't in our inventory, instead of just sending them on the enrollment flow where it fails, instead you can just display a web page that says, "Hey, this device isn't, meeting policy or whatever."
You can just hang it there, right? Like,
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
return
yeah.
anything to the Mac.
Yeah, because we update our inventory from CDW when they ship something, but we've had instances where they don't give us the list in time, and then our inventory checks fail when a
Sure.
device enrolls.
Yeah.
And then all chaos breaks loose.
That's right. That's where that freedom comes in. Where
Yeah.
you can then display well, hey, contact us.
Yeah.
This way.
Yeah, have it, have your support information where they can contact your support or whatever.
Yeah.